This is the Take Your Turn 2022 Tournament Go Event Round 4 recap. There are 5 rounds and 9 players. Each set is 2 games with players switching colors between games. In our recap, we'll be looking at one game in each set and highlighting a particular move or two, as well as discussing the general flow of the match. For more detailed game reviews, you can visit my YouTube channel, Arnfasta. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to look at Just Your Eventual Ruler versus Sequoia Game 2. Ruler is playing black, Sequoia is white. And just from the beginning, we can see it doesn't take us long. We are playing Mirror Go. Or I should say Ruler and Sequoia. Sequoia specifically is playing Mirror Go. By move 13, we get the 3-3 invasion from Ruler, which resolves, and Sequoia immediately returns their own 3-3 invasion. It isn't until move 36 here that we finally get a change-up, a deviation where Sequoia tries to hit black's upper right framework here. Tries to destabilize that group. From here, we continue this. There's a little bit of clamping down, but it's still pretty light. Sequoia still has a way out at this point, and instead Sequoia opts to go ahead and get real aggressive to jump in there. It's a tight space, but their goal is to disrupt this area. And we get this back and forth, this battle here is Sequoia is fighting to go ahead and try and make space on the right-hand side and live underneath, which would not only take away from the space that Ruler is trying to build, it would potentially give them avenues to work with in conjunction with these 2 stones up here, depending on how things exactly play out. We can see here that at move 53, Sequoia has tried to get themselves some space to work with. What they don't notice after they play R12, I should say a few more moves, with move 57 actually, that they don't notice they've left open this play at S8 with the double Atari, or they feel like they need to keep running to try and get around it, but they aren't able to get around it, and Ruler is able to catch it. Now, by doing that, by double Atarying, what we're doing is we're saying you can either choose one or the other. You can go ahead and try to save, black, Ruler is saying I can capture either group here by playing next. So instead, you can either try to save this group of 3 stones or this 1 stone by itself, but you are going to lose something, which, as soon as either group is lost, is going to further destabilize the group, making it more vulnerable. And from there, we have Sequoia putting in a good effort to try to salvage this group, but they aren't. There's too few liberties. There's too many cuts available here that Ruler is able to exploit. And because of that, just a few moves later, at move 69, Sequoia ends up resigning. And so everything really comes down to this one battle on the right side. Sequoia has a nice start, but isn't able to capitalize on it. And once that falls apart, decides that the game at that point is settled. The match overall went 2-0 in favor of Just Your Eventual Ruler. So our next set here our next match is going to be Mr. Cat versus Exmo. Again, game 2. I think the game 2 for a lot of these was very interesting. Mr. Cat is playing black, Exmo is playing white. And if we just go through the beginning here, we can see that early on, Mr. Cat goes for the right side, he goes for the top, and then he jumps into the center. And Exmo responds, interestingly, by shoring up their top left. Up here, to go ahead and reinforce the top right corner, as opposed to trying to get aggressive. And instead, what we see is Mr. Cat saying, okay, if you're going to play more defensive, I'm going to try to really reinforce this outer edge and make that more stable. Then we have a 3-3 invasion that gets ignored. And one of the things that's interesting right here is with this move and this response by Mr. Cat, by playing down, extending downward, it is trying to cut off Exmo from being able to easily connect to the left in these group of stones. However, by doing that, it's also pushing Exmo up into Mr. Cat's influence, which can be good if Mr. Cat feels like that they're able to lock down these stones, but to me right now it looks like they're playing a move behind, so it makes me a little worried about how Mr. Cat is going to be able to stop Exmo from taking too much of this area and finding a way to live. If it were reversed and Mr. Cat were playing first, I think it would be a different story, but Mr. Cat is playing a stone behind here. And because of that, we can see the ways in which Exmo tries to, or does, get themselves out. And when Mr. Cat double hanes here at 06, Exmo catches this and does a strong Atari to the left and immediately falls up to be able to do a capture underneath. And that now the original goal that Mr. Cat was going for wasn't able to pan out because these stones are able to link up, they are able to influence each other, and now we still have this bottom right hand side. So it made, the intention made sense, but with the execution, Exmo was able to sort of weasel their way out of there. And we see we have Mr. Cat looking for a way to kind of kill this group, not being able to, and this group eventually being able to get a little bit more settled and get a little bit more out of that area. And then we have this over here where Exmo is saying, all right, I'm going to try and jump ahead. I'm going to try and also destabilize this area. And one of the things that they do a nice job of is they are able to get an eye. And here, on the reverse, Mr. Cat does a nice job at catching this ladder. Exmo plays the ladder out, giving Mr. Cat a few extra points, but Mr. Cat does a nice job on spotting that and doing that cleanly. From here, what we get is this situation in which you have Exmo trying to find life here, so that the goal is 2 eyes. If they can live, they have totally destroyed at that point the influence that Mr. Cat was trying to build with this large framework. If they can't make the second eye, though, then in fact Mr. Cat will be in a great position. So it's really about who can turn this around, and this section is critical. So again, a nice job by Mr. Cat going ahead and catching these. That does allow Exmo to build this outer build this outer framework here, and they are able to turn it into a second eye. So they are able to go ahead and live, which is really crucial. If we continue on a little bit, there's a couple exchanges here. Now, in this happens a couple times elsewhere in this game, and I think it's worth noting that one of the characteristics for me of this game in particular is that there is close fighting, but Mr. Cat is just a move or two behind, and that is in Go, it is so crucial. It makes all the difference. And it's enough to turn the situation around so that Mr. Cat ends up with all of this group. This group's certainly here. And now if we see for a little bit further, at this point, this group is looking dead as well. And we actually see that resolution just shortly after. And it starts with just being a little bit behind, just a move behind here, and a not quite able to turn it around. From here, the other things I want to mention is just that this has big ramifications. Being just a move or two behind in the bottom here not only means those groups are dead, it also means that the groups that White has are alive. And so every subsequent encounter and exchange that happens, so we have this exchange up here that is squashed down, and then as Mr. Cat tries to go to play at B12 to find something in this left-hand side, they're out on their own again. And we can see they're looking for some space, they're looking to try to get enough space, but it doesn't exist, they aren't able to make it happen, and those stones that were played earlier by Exmo are coming into great effect here. And ultimately, we can see that Exmo wins by resignation. The match overall went 2-0 in favor of Exmo. But I think it's a situation in which Mr. Cat wasn't far behind in several of these exchanges, but because they were consistently behind and they weren't able to turn those situations into a profit, it snowballed and spiraled, and it made it more and more difficult to get ahead elsewhere and find ways to come back. So our last match for round four that we're going to look at is between Zeronics and Faded Sun. So one of the things here that I really want to mention is just quick exchange. I think that there's a really great use of space here, and I really, really love the use of space and the flexibility. So when Faded Sun plays at Q10, Zeronics then cuts in with a Q7 play to try to disrupt. Faded immediately jumps to R12 and says that's completely fine, I can build these things independently. And I think that that flexibility is so important, and we see that here. So from here, about move 32, we see that we start to get into some fighting. We see that Faded is looking for, how do I disrupt this space that Zeronics is trying to build? How do I not only get in there, and then how do I keep myself alive? And so we have a really great back and forth here, and it's already in this space. We're juggling several different groups, and so I think the level of play is really fantastic to watch, as there are multiple exchanges happening and multiple groups being juggled. And at the end of it, we have Faded coming out with, I think, a good position looking toward the center, with a black group of 3 stones here that are isolated. Granted, they still have room to grow. And the ability to continue to put on some pressure, though not a ton of pressure, but some pressure in here in the middle, in this lower right-hand section. So, and conversely, I think that Faded was able to take Zeronics' nice outer wall and really reduce its effectiveness at the moment. So this is a long game. I'm going to go ahead and move through most of it pretty quickly. But it's a really fantastic game for those who have access to the SGF. It's absolutely worth studying. The back and forth exchanges here are on both sides are very well played. So we can see the top left begins to develop. Same sort of idea in the right hand side. One player is and in the bottom, one player is taking the inner or the outer edge, and another player is taking the inside and taking towards the center. So from here, one of the things I love about this game is that it really shows the high skill level of both players. There's so many groups, and there's so many things that are unsettled at this point that both players have been able to are reading out and keeping track of, but there is a lot that is at play, and the timing at which things are placed down or snapped up when things are triggered becomes so important. And trying to maximize the efficiency, and also turn a lot of these very small groups of stones, trying to turn them into something larger, utilize them and to make a much bigger impact. And I think that, like this is by Zeronics is a great attempt to go ahead and lock down these stones. Conversely, we have Faded still fighting to keep them alive and pushing out. And you can see the way in which now Faded has been able to get a group out towards the center, closer to a connection, and certainly with a lot of space here. But that connection isn't complete yet. It's tenuous. It isn't solidified yet. And so Zeronics is going to try to jump on it. And Faded is already looking bigger, looking towards the center. And so the choices that they're making and the decisions is fantastic. And if we go ahead a little bit further, as the middle begins to get situated, we can see that we get a co-fight right around here for life. So at this point, this connection and really the status of life or death for these stones are going to depend on who can hold this connection at J18. If Faded can go ahead and hold on to it like this, then they're going to live. If Zeronics can capture it back, then that group is going to be isolated and will likely die. And so around this fight, we see where else they're pushing each other, trying to force each other to respond. And so again, we have Xeronix snap that up. And so in response, we have Faded threaten to push in and try and take this entire group, which Xeronix feels they need to respond to. And ultimately, with this play at L19, we get the resolution. We get the resolution, and the crucial aspects of this group are, those stones are alive. What the threat to this inner group here is maintained. From there, we again get another exchange here where they are close. They are very, very close fights here. And if we go a little bit further, this I wanted to highlight. I thought this was great too. This is a pretty, this may be a shape that can be hard to spot for those who don't have as much practice, and seeing Faded catch this weak point, which then means that as Xeronix tries to close it in, Faded can turn it into a single eye, can reduce it to a single eye, is just a really smart play. And again, one eye is fine as long as there's not two. That group is still dead. This outer group then is a little precarious, but has some support here, and the rest of this support structure on the outside means that it looks like it's going to be very difficult for Xeronix to make a second eye, but not impossible necessarily. But you can see the ways in which Faded is able to force then this closure down to keep it to one eye here, and then is able to really solidify with that D11 play that, hey, I am going to protect this group of stones and keep them alive and keep that threat on your inner group here strong and healthy. And we have Xeronix trying to make that second eye, Faded saying no way, the luck down, and just a couple moves later we have Faded Sun winning by resignation. So this the final result is 2-0 for Faded Sun. So let me go ahead and mention the other games real quick, and then in the wrap-up I'll touch on this, so we'll leave it here. Atreides got a bye this round, and Gorgeous Goose for Spadius was listed as 0-0. As we wrap up, I think one of the standouts for me is this game between Xeronix and Faded Sun. I think it's a really great example of how strong players are able to utilize weak groups and turn them into strong groups, and the complex micromanagement of multiple groups that can happen when you have a player who is able to read. Both of these players are managing multiple groups, trying to only do what is necessary trying to only do what is necessary to stay the most efficient, while trying to set up additional traps to keep their opponent from being able to get out. And the back and forth here was really great to watch. Just some really smart play. I think another thing too I mentioned earlier was how another trait of this round is how those small differences can spiral. A number of these capturing races were not by 5 liberties or 10 liberties. They were close. They were 1 or 2 liberties, as a lot of love fights are. But in these examples that we see, 1 or 2 is all you need. You can still come out ahead. And we can see how in some of those fights, as soon as that goes down, the surviving group has big ramifications for how the rest of the board plays out. So the way in which those local fights can have big impacts was, I think, another interesting thing to see here. So that was round 4 of Take Your Turn. For a deeper dive into round 4, definitely check out my YouTube channel, Arnfasta. And for everything Wargroove and chess related, please keep it right here on the Group of War channel. Thanks, everyone.